applied for my first college teaching job, I listed yoga instructor on the resume under previous experience. I was being honest. I was a yoga teacher. I used to be able to do back bends and I used to be able to do handstands. And what's more impressive is that I used to be able to teach you how to do back bends and handstands. But honestly, I'm not sure yoga teacher belonged on my CV. See, yoga wasn't really classroom teaching experience. I mean, certainly teaching yoga taught me how to be comfortable in front of a group. It gave me confidence. It taught me how to be attentive to the rhythm and cadence involved in public speaking, but it hardly prepared me to teach academic content. I wasn't really an educator yet. I didn't become an educator until years later, until I had my own classroom, until my own children started school. And that's when I began to think about schools and learning and teaching. That's when I started to ask questions about the way we teach our children to think about the world. And that's when I realized that education was all about relationships, and that in order to change our schools, we'd first have to change the way we teach our children to think about their relationship to the world at large. And that's when the lessons I learned teaching yoga really started to solidify. See, I realized that as a yoga instructor, my job was mostly about offering inspiring pep talks that congratulated my students on their commitment to showing up and doing transformational work. We all love transformation in the United States, right? Self-improvement, self-help, changing yourself, reinvention, rebranding. We love all that stuff. We're a nation that's founded on revolution, and therefore we remain a culture of innovation, disruptive solutions, and planned obsolescence. We like to overthrow everything, reinvent everything, even ourselves, right? Revolution after revolution. There's always something newer. There's always something shinier. In business, we have special names for revolutionary skills, right? Names like enterprising entrepreneurship. We have positions like chief innovative officer. In education, we call it reform. We talk about 21st century skills. But it's really just a language game. See, these narratives of revolution and transformation are the same in the business world and in education as they are on the yoga mat. All three sectors can't help but ground themselves in fantasies of novelty, youth, and newness. Even in the year 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville already observed that the USA had a love affair with innovation and progress and enterprise. He used phrases like feverish agitation, right, and frequent vicissitudes. He said perpetual change instead of reinvention and rebranding. But he still meant it like psychological age-defying wrinkle cream, okay? Always new, always young. We innovate, we transform, we let go of our habitual ways of being, right? Try it with me. Take a deep breath. And then let it out. Quiet your mind, right? Focused on the wind filling your lungs. Inhale, feel your spine lengthen, the crown of your head lifting towards the ceiling, and then exhale, sinking deeply into your seat, comfortably grounded in the present, sinking into now. Inhale, lifting, letting go, floating like a balloon, and then exhale, grounding, surrendering to gravity, slowly moving out of your head and into your heart. See, there's the problem. This is the beginning of a problematic way of thinking, right? This whole out of your mind and into your heart thing, head and heart. People are always talking about approaching things from a heart place. Magazine articles tell us we need more heart-centered leadership, right? Compassion apparently means listening from your heart, but it makes no sense, okay? It's false. This head and heart dichotomy, right? This polarization between feeling and thinking, don't buy into all of that. Okay, the heart is a pump, right? It moves blood. Right? It has nothing to do with how we respond to situations. The heart has nothing to do with love or emotion. It's head and heart. It's just another way that we reinforce a problematic separation between thinking and feeling, right? We relegate them to opposite poles, but thinking and feeling really go hand in hand. Consider this. We all feel all the time. It's impossible not to. Seriously, try it. Try not feeling. Go ahead. You can't do it, right? You can't not feel. Feeling is being. Feeling has to do with perception and sensation, experience, affect, emotional response to circumstances, personal reaction to the world around you. You're always feeling all the time. But in order to tell someone what you're feeling, you have to start thinking. In order to reflect silently on your feelings, you have to start thinking. In order to appreciate the way you feel, you have to think about them. Right? Thinking is the way in which we give attention to our feelings, the way in which we notice and appreciate them. And this is why I get so irritated when people tell me to stop overthinking things, right? They tell me that a lot. You're overthinking things. I hear it all the time. I'm an academic. I teach philosophy, psychology, intellectual history. I regularly attend academic and professional conferences. I constantly meet with so-called thought leaders, right? I've participated in international think tanks, but you don't need to constantly participate in thinking work to know that there's no such thing as overthinking. You don't need to be a professional thinker to understand that overthinking is not a real problem. You only need to look around the world as a whole, right? You only need to read the news and watch the television, and you'll see that what we need is more thinking, right? Not less. I wish our politicians did more thinking. I wish our corporate CEOs did more thinking. I wish that most college professors did more thinking. In fact, on a really basic level, I would argue that most of the time, modern humans underthink everything, right? I wish we had an overthinking problem. Instead, we've got a prejudice against thinking. And because of that, our schools are failing our children. See, the point of education is actually to create thinkers, to create reflective, thoughtful citizens, thinkers, not workers, not employees, thinkers. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how schools can and should create thinkers and why the trouble with education today doesn't start with the politics, and it doesn't start with the poverty, and it's not about the unions or the teachers or the parents. It's not about the Common Core or high-stakes testing. It's not about grit or character. It's not about 21st century skills or a new economy. It's not about all these new technologies that are drastically changing the way we relate to the world. I mean, all of those things are real and significant, but on a foundational level, fundamentally, the root cause is that we really don't understand what thinking is. And if we want to radically change our school system, and the word radical, by the way, it comes from the Latin radix, meaning root, like the vegetable, like a radish in your salad, right? If we want to radically change our school system, we have to look at the root cause. We have to understand what it means to create thinkers. And to do that, we have to understand what thinking is. It's not the same as neurological brain function. It's not the same as absorbing academic content. And it's not about approaching things rationally. No, thinking is really about relationships, about friction, about the way in which we rub up against our surroundings, the way in which we acquaint ourselves with the world around us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the philosopher Martin Heidegger. So Heidegger once gave a series of lectures all about thinking, and I'm borrowing a bunch of ideas from him here, okay? And that's okay, because ideas don't really belong to individuals. They're not objects. You can't steal them, okay? Heidegger, in fact, got most of his ideas from the ancient Greek philosophers that predate Socrates, folks like Heraclitus and Anaximander and Parmenides, okay? Sometimes you've got to go all the way back to the origin of things, and that's what Heidegger did when he thought about thinking. He explained that the words to think and to thank come from the same old English root. Think, thank. They even sound alike. Think, thank, thinking, thanking. The relationship between these words matters because it tells us that at some point in human history, giving thanks was understood in the same way as giving thought. They were one and the same. Back in the day when humans had less words, less noise, less cable television channels, less TED Talks, less social media, humans didn't separate thinking and thanking because fundamentally, radically, being thoughtful is the same as being thankful. Thinking is how the human animal expresses gratitude. We express reverence and appreciation for the world in which we live by giving it thought. We express reverence and appreciation for the feelings we experience by giving them thought. When you give something thought, you take note. Nowadays, we expect our students to take note, but we don't expect them to notice the world around them, right? Because we've forgotten that noticing is the first part of thinking. You notice, and then you take note. Taking notes is a way of expressing gratitude, and thinking is thankful because it takes note and then articulates the things that were noticed. That word articulate is important here. Education is primarily concerned with the articulation that's part of thinking, thanking, and noticing. So let's think about that, okay? Let's think about that word articulation. Take note of it, okay? We ordinarily use the word articulation when we're interested in language and speaking. We say someone is articulate. When we talk about articulating our thoughts, but it doesn't just mean that a student is good at expressing herself. We also use the word articulate in terms of muscles and appendages, like muscle articulation. We're back to yoga. Inhale, exhale. Right? Articulated muscles are muscles that connect at a joint, muscles that work together. And in that way, articulation in yoga is the same as articulation in education. Being articulate means being able to work together. It's about communication. It's about connection, relationships. Nobody communicates or connects in isolation. That's impossible. Thinking, thanking, and articulation are always about relationships. And education is always about relationships, community, and gratitude. If we want to create thinkers, we need to create people who articulate together. But that's not the way we've structured our education system. The current school model is all about separations, disconnected individuals, children who sit in isolated desk chairs that function like classroom cubicles, separating people, separating ideas. I know a couple of 8th graders that turned in the same paper on the first day of school this year because they worked together on the summer reading. They cooperated, they collaborated, right? They discussed Mark Twain during their summer vacation, and they got penalized for cheating. It was an independent project, and working together wasn't acceptable. Because in the current school model, knowledge is about individual success and personal ownership. It's my education, they're my grades, it's my opportunity to get ahead in the world, usually by leaving someone else behind. Right? The current model of education is about fractions rather than friction. Fractions are about breaks, distance, disconnection. Friction, on the other hand, describes the way in which things rub up against one another. School needs more friction and less fractions. I know all of this sounds romantic, right? Who's going to argue with more community? Who's going to argue with more love, more connection, more rubbing up against each other, right? Nobody. That's until I tell you that the biggest obstacle to thankful thinking is rationality. Until I tell you that in order to create more connection, more love, more community, you need to get irrational. Until I tell you that rational thinking isn't so great because it's all about fractions. It's all about ratio. It's all about common denominators. It's all about reducing everything into homogeneous and therefore expendable and separate measured individual parts, like piecemeal stations on a factory assembly line floor. That's what rational is all about. But that's not the way we usually think about rational thought. We think about it as if the word meant moral superiority, right? Rational is the right way to make sense of things, the calm way, the true way, the measured way, right? The measured way to approach the world. We forget that the first 5 letters in rational spell ratio. Rationally is rationally, right? To see things rationally means to see things in terms of ratios or fractions. 1 is to 2, as 2 is to 4, because 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Fractions, ratios. You already know all this. It's basic arithmetic. But what you probably don't realize is that when you take this kind of thinking and you put it in a classroom, you reduce a room full of individuals into common denominators. They become first graders, second graders, third graders. They become A students, B students, C students. We identify a category, and then we ask how well small children measure up to it. Little Jeffrey is to A quality work as little Rhonda is to C quality work. Is little Bobby performing at a first grade reading level? How well does little Jennifer's performance measure up to common standards of numeracy and literacy? Have the children become whole people yet? Are they whole units, or are they still just fractions on the way to becoming 1/1, whole common denominators? I don't like that way of thinking about my children. I don't like that way of thinking about your children. I think it's unethical. I'd prefer to be irrational, unmeasured. I want to see Jeffrey as Jeffrey and Rhonda as Rhonda. I don't care how well they measure up to some intellectual ideal. I want to see Bobby as Bobby and Jennifer as Jennifer. I want to see how well they articulate their own voices. I want to see how well they relate to one another, how well they connect, how well they communicate, how well they rub up against the world around them. I want to see friction. I want us to remember that the reason we teach anything, reading, writing, history, science, math, even fractions, is to teach our children how to think, how to overthink, how to encounter the world in which they live, how to communicate and connect, how to relate to others with gratitude and appreciation, how to give thought and give thanks, how to take note, and how to notice. And most importantly, how to articulate their own voices as if they were muscles joining together. Voices connecting with voices to build communities. I want to see children articulate their own voices in such a way that those voices become meaningful to the world as a whole. Because when we truly teach young people how to think, we teach them how to be themselves with so much authenticity and confidence that they will never need transformation or reinvention or rebranding because they've already become all of themselves. Thank you.